if you weren't familiar with her and her game before Tuesday night, you gotta learn the name. I mean, they got completely screwed on that call. You do have the goalie and the defense to support that. This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. What's up, guys? Welcome into Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Really excited about this episode as we kind of work our way through PLL free agency that started here earlier on this week. Was really excited in episode 126 to be joined by both Phil Shore and Caitlin McDonough there in that episode. But on this episode, really excited to be joined by Denver Outlaws beat writer Topher Adams.
Yeah, great to be on. Super exciting time in the PLL calendar. Obviously, still a ways away from actual games on the field, but teams starting to take shape. College season's in full swing, so you're preparing for the draft. So very exciting time for sure. And again, super excited to be on the show.
Yeah, so as we go through this episode, we'll kind of go, as I mentioned off air, kind of almost position by position, I would say, through this Outlaws team, at least, like I said, with free agency now underway, kind of as it currently stands with this group. So I think starting out, taking a look at the offense to begin. Obviously, you look at what they've done with that attack so far. They've got those three former Tewaaraton winners, also have some pieces there in that offensive midfield like Sam Hanley and Josh Zawada. Just start out by maybe talking about the offensive side in particular and what they could look like here in 2025.
Yeah, so with the offense in 2025, it really goes back to the Pat Cavanaugh trade. Back in the fall, Boston was looking to move Cavanaugh, and then Tim Soudan's the guy who, if there's a trade available, if there's a move available, like he's always willing. And I think this is a team that's been looking for a true playmaker at X for a while, dating back to Brendan Nichtern's rookie year with the Chrome. That was 2 years ago, I believe. That he was that great presence behind the cage, and then obviously Jordan Wolf with the initial Chrome and the Rattlers before that. So that's kind of a position that they really value. And they got a little bit of that production with Eric Law last year down the stretch, but I think they wanted a long-term answer to be kind of their driving force behind the goal, and that's now going to be Pat Cavanaugh. And then now the question is kind of mixing and matching all these pieces together. Because you have Brandon O'Neill on the left. Logan Wisnauskas plays kind of a similar position, and he's back. Eric Law is back. That's another guy that's kind of at X. Nichtern himself could be back. That was something I've heard whispers of. He could be available to play again this season in the PLL, be it for Denver or who knows who else in the league. But kind of as we enter towards the end of free agency, into the draft and then to training camp, it'll be interesting to see how these pieces all fit together. I would expect a Tewaaraton attack line, something with Cav on the right, Wiz behind, Brennan on the left, and then as these things kind of actually play out, everything kind of shifts a little bit, and Cav will be behind, Wiz will be kind of the low side, and then Brennan sweeping up top the way he likes to do. So it's very exciting, and anytime I think you can get just an influx of talent is the biggest thing. I think if you go back to a couple of years ago, this team was just lacking a lot of dynamic playmakers on offense. I think now they have the high-end, like all-pro MVP type talents with a Brennan O'Neill, with potentially a Pat Cavanaugh. Logan Wisnauskas is a two-time All-Star. These are big-time talents. Now it's just finding the right mix of guys to kind of put all the pieces together.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned there a couple seasons ago how the offense maybe lacked a little bit of that talent. And I think in a way that kind of forced a guy like Sam Hanley, even as a rookie, to have to come in right away and maybe sort of be that dominant guy for that offense. And he's been a interesting player, I think, in his first few seasons. He was a guy that coming into the PLL in that draft a couple of years ago, a lot of people obviously were really high on, and a lot of his abilities. Also a bigger body guy, certainly helps him with his game as well. So just talk about him in particular, and maybe how does he, with the way that this offense looks currently, how does he take maybe that next step this season?
Yeah, I think Handley is in a lot of ways sort of a missing link in this offensive structure. If he can consistently be the player he was at Penn, the player he's been in moments in the PLL, that's kind of the missing piece more than anybody from the outside. Because you have the pieces at attack, like I mentioned with O'Neal and Cav. It's now finding guys who can consistently win matchups and create plays from midfield. Like they have Graham Bundy, who's the great shooter, the great finisher. They have Justin Anderson, who's kind of the all around. He's a cutter, he's a shooter, he can dodge, he can play both ways. So they have like the glue guy, the off ball guy. And now it's really, can Handley be the winner? Can he win a matchup? Can he beat a pole? Can he beat a short stick? Can he make good passes down to the attack? Can he shoot? And we've seen plenty of moments of that. He's got a ridiculous highlight reel in the PLL with using his big frame and his powerful shot and all these great skills he has. But can he piece it together through a full 10-game season for a successful team? I think the talent's there. It's really just a matter of, will he ever put the pieces together at the PLL level? I don't know, but I think it's kind of a big question Denver's asking themselves heading into this year.
Talking with Denver Outlaws beat writer Topher Adams here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. We'll take a quick timeout and come back with plenty more here on this episode. Hey guys, I want to tell you about this amazing opportunity Zimbabwe Lacrosse has created. In 2024, their women's team finished 4th at the Heritage Cup in their first ever competition. Since then, they've added a men's program. Your donation covers things like travel and participation costs for the Heritage Cup in Massachusetts and the Wildfire Tournament in Ghana. It'll also help them to host more lacrosse clinics in Zimbabwe and cover things like equipment costs, uniforms, and other essentials. Please consider helping with any donations that you can, as the link to their campaign is attached to this episode and on my Twitter at Stevie Mac Media. Thank you for always supporting me in my endeavors of doing this show and now helping support them in their amazing opportunity. All right, welcome back. Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, joined on this episode by Denver Outlaws beat writer Topher Adams. Touched in segment 1 with him on that Outlaws offense. Took a bit of a deep dive with that. Here in segment 2, want to turn our attention now to the defensive side of the ball, where going into 2025, it looks like the Outlaws currently on their roster, a couple guys north of the age of 30. Don't want to call out, obviously, any listeners out there that might be in that age range, which there are certainly a handful, but obviously looking at that, they do have that number 11 pick in the draft. Do you see them maybe with that, using that 11th pick on the defensive side?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think definitely looking at the team needs heading into the offseason, getting younger at defense is something they need to do organizationally for sure. I think you have your starting group of guys 100%. Like as long as Mike Manley and Jesse Bernhardt want to play, they're going to play. And they proved last year that they're still among the best in the world at what they do. Manley's as disruptive as ever. Jesse Bernhardt, obviously a great coach at University of Maryland and great leader, great cover guy. He does everything well. And then JT Giles Harris, he's in his own category of lockdown pole. But I think for depth reasons, finding another guy you can add to the roster, a guy you can bring to training camp, a guy you can play occasionally throughout the year or throw on a reserve roster even, just to get into the group for the future, because who knows how much longer Manley or Bernhardt are going to want to run it back. So whether it's at 11, whether it's later in the draft, or even just an undrafted guy, I definitely think they're going to add 1 or 2 more polls that they can just kind of keep in the family, if you will, so that next year or the year after that, when Manley's retired, when Bernhardt's retired, they have a little bit more familiarity and a little bit more of cohesiveness defensively. But I think as it stands, I think they like their core group of guys. It's more just how much longer do those guys want to keep playing? And certainly for the short term, everybody's fully bought in and locked in for 25.
Now, taking a look at the goalie situation could be a little interesting, I think, going into 2025. Obviously, you go back to last summer, Sean Scanoni was the starter at the start of the year, struggled out of the gate, so they made that switch over to Owen McElroy. Um, I'd say Scanoni probably the more experienced of the two. Neither one really considered like an older player in the PLL. So I think it would be interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts on where do they go, at least to start 2025 in the goal.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be Owen McElroy as their guy for 2025. Obviously, things could change. I know they like Matt Note, who is currently unsigned, but they expect to bring him back to their room as well. I don't think he's played a PLL game yet, but he's a guy they're pretty high on. But the team was happy with Owen McElroy last year. Obviously, it was his first time really getting to start, and he's see any significant playing time in the PLL. And he showed in flashes high-level game-winning ability. But I think the question with him is, can he be that guy, 10 games a year and playoffs? I think we're seeing a full changing of the guard in the goalie world. That last generation of guys, John Galloway, then into Kyle Bernlohr, who just retired, even Blaze Reardon, who's, still great, but, he's starting to get towards the way out of his pro career in the next couple of years here. That generation of guys is kind of making way for a really great era of goalies we've got now with Liam Entenmann in New York, Krebs in Maryland, and all these other Kirst in Boston, the other really, really good one. So many great young goalies. I think Denver thinks, and I would agree with this, that McElroy can be in that tier of guys, and he can be a 60% kind of guy. But will you see that every game? Can he be a game winner in a playoff series or in a playoff matchup? We will see. I think he's a good fit, and I think he fits the timeline of the team also even better than a guy like Scanoni, who's a little bit older. But I think this new Denver team, even with Bernhardt and Manley, is definitely on the younger side, and I think McElroy kind of fits right into what they want timeline and kind of championship window, if you think of it in those terms. So I think he's definitely the guy, and we'll see if he can kind of build on that first season of a starter he had last year.
Again, talking with Denver Outlaws beat writer Topher Adams here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Final question for you here. Looking at the face-off position with a guy like Luke Weirman, currently, I believe, at least I saw listed as their only face-off currently on the roster. Actually did pretty well a season ago for the Outlaws, going right around maybe 49-50%, I think it was, on the season. But looking at maybe a possible number two in that position, who do you think is somebody that they could be looking at there? I know a guy like Petey LaSala, I think, is still unsigned as a free agent. Could he possibly be in that mix as a number two?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's not a name I've heard specifically, but obviously he is a proven guy at the Stripe. Obviously, dominant college career as well. And like Weirman, he's a guy who can do more than just win a faceoff. He can create off of a win. But I definitely think Weirman is the guy that Denver's going to roll with to start the year as their number one. They will add somebody for training camp. I can guarantee that. But I don't think it's going to be a guy they seriously expect would win that job. At least not they're not going to go out and make like a Trevor Baptiste, Joe Nardelli type of addition, right? They're not going to try and replace Luke Weirman right now. I would expect it to be either a young, unproven guy, like an undrafted free agent who maybe got a cup of coffee on a training camp, or a rookie out of the draft, or a kind of UDFA, another UDFA guy. Someone they can just kind of bring in, see what he's got. Maybe you get a gem. You never know. He just balls at training camp, and suddenly you got two great face-off options. But yeah, I think Luke Weirman had a really promising rookie season. There were flashes that he can be more than league average, and I think his offensive ability is kind of the biggest differentiating factor for him. Um, I think every team would want a Trevor Baptiste or a TD Erlin that can kind of slant the field completely their way. But, there's only so many of those guys in the world, to be honest with you. And with Luke Weirman, they stay firmly middle to upper middle of the pack. They're not in face-off crisis like the Water Dogs have been at times, like the Cannons have been at times. I think as long as they have a guy that they trust to win big face-offs, which I think they do with Weirman, they're going to be happy. It's now just, who's a body we can kind of get in the mix at training camp. Maybe a guy who can give us another option if Weirman got hurt or, he starts to underperform in year 2. So I think they are really bought in on Weirman, and now it's just what does the depth look like behind that?
Yeah, and you mentioned his ability to really make some of those big face-off wins. I think, you go back to early last season, I believe it was, when he, in that one fourth quarter, he won pretty much every one of those face-offs in that fourth quarter, and I believe won the one in overtime as well. So, yeah, definitely has that sort of big moment ability kind of in him already, and to have that as a rookie, I think made it even more impressive. But Topher, really want to thank you for coming on here today and joining me for this episode.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Always glad to hop and talk Outlaws. I think it's going to be a really fun year for Denver. And then I think the PLL at large, so much youth right now, a lot of new faces, familiar faces in new places perhaps as well. So very exciting times. And again, thank you for having me on.